Welcome to Manager Tools. Managing During a Pandemic, the COVID-19 Cast, Part 2. This cast answers these questions. How should I manage my team during the international pandemic? What can I do to communicate during a crisis? Are there special rules about working from home? Well, if you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go. Before we start, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on managing during a pandemic, especially put out for the COVID-19 crisis that we're going through right now. If you haven't listened to part 1 about one-on-ones, you have to go back and listen to it. It is the most important thing that we're going to talk about during this series that you can do, and you should do them immediately. So go listen to part 1 and then come back here and we'll follow up with some more additional advice.
And full disclosure, people, I mentioned this in the previous portion of this cast, but I'll mention it again here. Every single time we record a cast, there are show notes that go with it. It'll probably be about a 10-page white paper with all of our guidance in it in a very readable form. It's not a transcript. You won't have to listen to all of our ums and ahs or our side comments or what have you. Mike and I have that in front of us when we're recording. We've done that for all 1,200 or whatever, all of our casts the last 15 years. That's particularly important for this cast because normally that's only available to people who are licensees of our work. The audio of the cast, what you're listening to now, is free. But if you want a written version, which we think is much easier to consume, it only takes 10 minutes or so to read, and you can keep it forever and refer to it quickly and so on. And you don't have to listen to my voice repeatedly over the course of your career. Then that requires you being a licensee of our work, which costs $200 a year. This cast is an exception. We want as many managers as possible to be as prepared as possible for the COVID-19 problem. The big thing we're thinking about is working from home. And as we mentioned in the first part of the cast, it's much harder than you realize. Based on our data, we've studied it, much harder than you realize to manage people at a distance. Companies do it because it's cheap in most cases, and there's good reason for that. But in this particular case, virtually every manager in the world is having to do it. And if you're just starting to do it, and you haven't done one-on-ones, and so now you're going to start one-on-ones, and you're starting with a team that used to be co-located with you and now is distant from you, that's going to be hard work. And we want to help in whatever way we can as the world faces the international pandemic that is COVID-19. And so you can come to our website, manager-tools.com, and go to podcasts and click on the top podcasts in the chronological list, and it will be this cast, and you'll be able to download the show notes. Additionally, at the end of all of our show notes, if we mention other podcasts that we have done over the years that are related to the topic or that we mention in the cast, there at the bottom of the show notes is a list of all those casts. This cast mentions so many other show notes or so much other guidance, that list is quite long. Now, if you're not a licensee, those show notes won't be available, but the audio will be right there. And if you click on the link in the PDF that you download of these show notes, it will take you to that podcast webpage. You can certainly listen to it on our app. Our app is free, or you could sort through your RSS reader on your iPod or your phone or whatever you use, and should be no problem. Mike, did that all make sense? I don't think I've ever made an announcement like that.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
That was,
okay,
I think, sometimes we make assumptions about what people know, and assumptions kick me in the butt every time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So before we start talking about what I think of as part 2 of this cast, which is about video stand-ups and some other areas, I want to go back and just mention a couple of things that I don't think I highlighted particularly well about one-on-ones, particularly remote one-on-ones or distant virtual team one-on-ones. So, if you don't know it, we want more communication and we want better, higher quality communication. So we're not against phone one-on-ones, but we have data which shows that video one-on-ones work even better than phone. Okay. If you're requiring your directs to use video to get into conference calls and so on, then you must require video during your one-on-ones with them. If they don't have the equipment or you're not requiring it, then phone is okay. Our data show that a phone one-on-one is about 80% as useful in terms of results and retention scores as a face-to-face one-on-one. Now, for the record, that doesn't mean that, phone one-on-ones don't work as well. It means that distance makes things harder, because both of those efforts were compared to managers who didn't do anything at all, and the managers who were managing at a distance and didn't do anything at all got no improvement in results and retention, versus if you immediately go to a phone one-on-one, you get 80% of that. We chalk that up. That's not data. We're interpreting the data here. We chalk that up to the trust that's harder to create, harder to sustain when you're at a distance, based on some of the stuff we were talking about in the previous cast with the Allen curve and so on. So we're recommending video. If you can't do that, then certainly do audio, do a regular phone call. In addition, we recommend, we said take notes on an iPad or handwritten, but we also recommend that you be the one that make the call. For some reason, our data show that if you're face-to-face with someone, it's better for them to come to your office. I won't go into all the reasons why. That's not the purpose of this cast. On the other hand, our data also shows it works better if the manager is the one that initiates the call when you're doing a phone or a video one-on-one. You could certainly do it the other way around. You could say, we're all going to be at our desks, so fine, just call me. But we've discovered that an awful lot of managers throughout the years have gotten very used to people coming to their office, and they literally remember, pardon us for saying it that way, that they were doing a one-on-one when their direct walks into the office. If you're not at your desk or you're distracted and you get a video call in and you have all your notifications turned off, you're going to end up being late for your one-on-one. Now, the other side of this coin is if you're the one making the call, you have to be on time. So your mileage may vary. Our data show that it's better if you're doing a phone or a video one-on-one if you make the call. And we also have guidance, which is in the mentioned cast links, regarding working remotely, some recommendations for how to set up your home office space. Your company doesn't magically expect you to snap your fingers and have a perfect office built in your house. You might not should choose the laundry room, but there are better choices. And you ought to be aware of how the room behind you looks as a manager when you're doing a video one-on-ones, home to home, if you will, over the coming weeks. Okay. Sorry, Mike. I just wanted to clean up some of that I think some of it was in my head, but it never came out of my mouth.
Yeah. Great additions.
Okay. So a couple of other topics we're going to cover in part 2. We're going to start talking about starting morning video stand-ups, where we've learned from the Scrum and Agile world. We're going to talk about communicating aggressively. And the last part of this part 2 is some important rules and laws of note that might be worth it, that I think many of our listeners will want to know about. But I also think there's some of your directs that you might want to direct them to. And in fact, you would be welcome to share our show notes with your directs. We prefer you didn't just share the show notes willy-nilly. They are copyrighted. But if you believe a particular manager could benefit from them, if you benefit from them, we don't want to stop sharing this one particular cast. Okay. So picking back up, start morning video stand-ups.
Yeah, interesting that, again, we're talking about communications here, right? That's the common theme.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, Horstman's law of organizational communication is say something 7 times, people, and half of your people will tell you they heard it once. You simply think that when you say things, it lands like pearls of beauty and wisdom in the minds of your directs. But frankly, they have a 1,000 other voices in their head. And I promise you, the first time you say it, they don't hear it. The second time you say it, they might hear it, but they don't understand it, or they disagree with it. And it just takes a while. So we recommend you have a morning video stand-up with your entire team every workday. Okay. Now, some people aren't going to like this, and that's too bad. Some people don't like working from home. People don't like being self-quarantined. Some people don't like one-on-ones at all. But there is a balance to be struck between the individual's desire for their perfect workplace and what you need as a manager to help you do your job, and what the organization needs in terms of trust and open communication and frequent communication, even robust communication between you and your directs. Now, look, this morning video stand up, we have at Manager Tools, I picture this, by the way, using Zoom, but we are agnostic about which platform you use, as long as everybody can see everybody else while sitting, looking at their webcam from their computer. Boy, Mike, there's another example of technology that didn't exist 15 years ago that we're lucky in the light of this, maybe that's not the right term, in light of this pandemic, that there are technologies in place that allow so many of us to be able to work from home. So it only has to be 10 minutes. It's a group video chat. Perhaps I think it's best if you start, and maybe it just be a quick welcome. And in fact, you don't need a precise agenda. Okay. But you have a start and end time, and everybody learns pretty quickly how long this is going to take. Now, look, if you have 20 people on your team, you may need 15 minutes. Okay. Don't listen to the naysayers who say, I've got other stuff to do. Every single person on your team, no offense, don't take this the wrong way. All of us here at Manager Tools work from home. We know what working from home is like, except, of course, when we're traveling. The idea that 15 minutes is an imposition on people is ludicrous. Every single day, people are going to be working from home, and home chores and errands are going to distract them at least that much that wouldn't have done so while they're at work. Now, we don't want to stop them from chores or errands. The point is, that's non-productive time. And frankly, in addition, in light of school kids being home, they're going to have to spend time with their kids. And gee whiz, do we want them to not spend time with their kids? Heck no, I want them to spend 15 minutes with their kids. My point is, the idea that a 15-minute meeting that you call they're just too busy to handle that, when there's 30 minutes to an hour worth of chores and errands and childcare and so on out of their workday, that's completely unproductive relative to work, and yet ethically necessary. The idea that 10 or 15 minutes in the morning is an imposition or a problem is ludicrous. It holds no water, and this is one of those cases where you insist you use your role power rather than your relationship power to get things done. Maybe you start with an update from your boss or bosses or your company. Maybe you're going to start with virus news, although if I didn't say it yesterday, I'll just say it again. It has been my experience being involved in this in the last couple of weeks and having to communicate to a large community. I don't know, Twitter followers only like 6,000 or something, but we've sent out several notes to our entire community of listeners and licensees and registered members, and I think that's probably 100,000 people. And one of the things that has surprised me is how unsophisticated, that sounds like a bad word, sorry, uncareful, let's put it that way, people have been regarding the sharing of information about what's happening related to the virus itself, the healthcare system, governmental responses, corporate responses to it, and so on. If you're going to start by sharing about the virus, you need to be sure that the kinds of information you're sharing are not rumors, are not third-party comments, are not suggestions or ideas or what-ifs. And so I'll use a phrase I've used before many times. You need curated news sources. That means professionals who look at the news and decide what's valuable and what's not. Now, you may think that that's a filter, okay? And by the way, you'd be right. And usually it's a filter you have to pay for. If you asked me for the curated news sources that I would trust, I would choose the world's paper of record, the New York Times, or I would choose the Wall Street Journal. And their electronic versions are updated quite frequently. That doesn't include Twitter. It doesn't include Facebook. If you're reading things from Facebook or Twitter, which have a very low bar to entry, folks, you may very well essentially be adding, certainly it's a very highly likely you could be adding to the disinformation your team has to deal with. And for many people on your team, that will increase their fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And you're not helping. You're setting an example that anybody can share anything that they heard or want or fear regarding the virus. And that's not helpful. It's not effective. And you don't need to guarantee people their free speech rights relative to the virus at your organization. Now, you may choose not to do that, or you may choose to do something like that at the end. That's fine. Remember this, guys, when it comes to waterfall information, stuff from your bosses and so on, managers are not communicated to, we are communicated through. What that means, for example, is we should not be forwarding emails from above to our team where all we do is to append an FYI at the top or the front of the mail. You're obligated when you get stuff from your company to read it, to think about it, and to interpret what this means for your team right now and put that on top of the mail. Okay? It would be no problem if HR finally finished a big project unrelated to working from home, unrelated to COVID, but about benefits, and say, you might put at the top, this is about the benefits project that everybody in HR that we got interviewed for 6 months ago. They just finished it. You needn't read it right now. You may want to put a pin in it and read it again in a few weeks once we're back all together. At a high level, it might say this and this and this. That's how effective communicating managers communicate. Now, don't tell me, by the way, that you get too much email. I'm sorry, we have too many podcasts about email and so on. I know you get a lot of email. I know you get hundreds of emails every day. And this is part of the manager's job. And as we like to joke, that's why you get the big bucks. You could, in your morning video stand-up meeting, ask everybody to share what their priorities are during the day, what they need to help get it done, issues they're facing, anything else they want to share. Again, don't let them just share whatever they read anywhere. I'll say this: the people who are attending our Silicon Valley conference that was scheduled this week just got a note this morning that we finally felt that on balance, risks and benefits, we had to cancel the Silicon Valley conference. Well, part of that it relates to this story. I was with a friend yesterday afternoon, and in the course of conversation, he mentioned through some of his friends that the governor of California, Governor Newsom, our governor, was within 48 hours of locking down California. And he was sending that to all of our friends in a text. And I was very surprised by this. First of all, locking down isn't a governmental term, and that sounds like an emotional bit of icing on the cake for what was probably the original story. And then I said to him, "Well, he can't lock the state down." He says, "Well, that's what it says here, is locking it down." I said, "Actually, no. I mean, the U.S. Constitution guarantees the free right of interstate commerce and interstate travel. A governor of any one state can't close his or her state, period. It's against the Constitution. Okay. There's case law about this and has been for 100 years. So what happens is that something is said about, the government is looking to do something, and somebody overreacts and then puts it out there, and then second and third and fourth parties share it. And suddenly the story is somebody's locking down California. And to be fair, this has even crept into the actual news, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the London Times, other places, that say that Italy or Spain or France, I think it's Italy is on lockdown. I have to say, I don't know what lockdown means. In fact, in the words of today, I'm not even sure what quarantine means because people are using the word quarantine when in fact they mean self-quarantine. And just by the way, you can't self-quarantine yourself. You can't. I mean, a quarantine is an enforced isolation. There's a third party involved in making sure that you stay quarantined. Now, guys, I don't mean to make this a vocabulary exercise, but my point is, oh, and by the way, and then just yesterday, Sunday, the governor announced that they were closing bars and a couple of other businesses. Hotels could stay open, restaurants could stay open, but they were going to require social distancing and so on in terms of table distances and so on. I think movie theaters maybe, but guys, please don't quote me on that. My point was they were making an announcement. And by the way, we were talking about this a couple hours before the announcement happened. And this guy, this friend of mine had told me, yeah, a friend who knows says we're about to go in lockdown. Well, there's a big difference between closing bars and a lockdown. And if you let 5 or 6 people on your team talk about rumors that they've heard, and they talk about it in that way, you'll be creating fear rather than generating trust. And so we absolutely have to be careful. Don't be trafficking in rumors about what you heard someone else say about a situation they themselves didn't have firsthand experience with. Only use curated news sources. Encourage your directs to do the same. If someone shares virus news with a team, the source of which isn't clear or doesn't meet these kind of standards, give them feedback about that. If your company is putting out virus news, read a couple of back issues in the next 24 hours. And if in fact that's helpful, send that out every morning and tell your folks, this is what we're going to use as the unofficial official source of this team regarding the virus. If one of your people persists, give them feedback about what they're doing. If you don't know our feedback model, about which we probably have 50 podcasts, simply call them on the phone or get them on a video chat privately one-on-one and say, I want you to stop sharing this information with your colleagues because it's not vetted, it's not curated. We've seen a couple of instances where it's not accurate and it's not helping us. I respect that you're concerned. I'd love for you to share stuff with me. And if I feel like it's good, I'll share it with everybody else. But I think you really have to be careful. And if your directs say, I just want to be helpful, you say, yeah, I get that. I'm not faulting your desire to be a good teammate at all. I'm simply saying you may be wanting to do a good thing and you may be having negative implications. And unfortunately, that's where I have to step in. Now, you might think this is an abridgment of somebody's rights, guys, but you'd be wrong. Trust me, we've been talking about this for 15 years. Okay, next, communicate aggressively. Usually we say communicate assertively, but we as managers, our ethical responsibility is to be good to other people, and our professional responsibility is to help them be productive. To achieve results and retention. They are being communicated to in 1,000 different ways about 100 different things about stuff that's going to be deleterious to results and retention. And so we have to counteract that. As I've been telling people for years, particularly as it regards social and cultural issues, the antidote to really bad ideas is not censorship. It's better ideas, okay? So we want to communicate aggressively about all forms of our relationship with our directs. So try to make a daily video call to each individual on your team. It's just 2 or 3 minutes. Don't rely on email. Don't rely on email just because your direct says that's what they prefer. There's nothing wrong with saying, I've got 2 people here, one of whom is very outgoing, very voluble. I'm going to call her. This other guy is a little bit more taciturn, a little bit more. I'm going to email him on something that's going on. There's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't mean that therefore, anytime I talk to this guy, I'm going to use email. We need to be thinking about using all of our communication media to our advantage. Okay. Don't be afraid to read a text or a Slack message from your directs and ask your direct to video call you after you get it. Okay. If you're waiting, if you have 5 minutes before a video call and one of the people on your team is not on the call, you can easily quickly video call them and say, hey, I just want to check in. Just want to see how you're doing. Everything's going okay. I know you had some problems relative to school yesterday. How did that turn out? Okay. This is what you're going to have to do to work hard to counteract the degradation of trust and the increase in fear that comes with the distance and the uncertainty and the doubts that are out there.
Yeah. And guys, if you're listening to us, many of you are high D's or high I's in the disc sense, right? You're assertive in your communication, right? And you might think to yourself, well, if they have a problem, they'll tell me. No.
What?
Yeah, well, that's what people think. Half the world they're not assertive. You're not going to know. And in these challenging times, you need to see their body language. You need to see their facial expressions. You need to talk to them often and observe and identify things where somebody says, oh, I'm fine. And you look at their body language and their facial expressions, and it says anything but fine. That's an indication that you need to ask more questions, right?
Yeah. Just because one of our directs might say, I'm not a big communicator, doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to be a robust communicator normally, but especially so during times of crisis and change. It just makes sense, okay? Please don't fall into the trap, the efficiency trap versus the effectiveness trap of letting all of your communications with your people be textual, okay? Push hard for audio and video. Move up the quality scale, okay? And away from efficiency whenever you possibly can. We need, as managers and as voices for reason and professionalism and so on, we need to do everything we can to connect with our team members, even when it's inconvenient. So now let's talk about, I decided to add a section that might be helpful just to share some things that I've been studying about because I've been getting questions about them from the field regarding rules and laws of note that it's been my experience that if someone doesn't understand the rules and laws, they might ask, but there's also a separate type of ask that happens where people don't know the rules and laws or they think they know them and they use them as weapons to say, well, you can't do that to me or that doesn't apply to me or no, I think there's a law against that. I'm going to go talk to HR and those kinds of things. Now, to be honest, I don't think the kind of directs who normally would do that are going to do it as often during this time. But the world has changed, at least in the short term. In a specific way. And there are some things we probably all could benefit from knowing. So a full disclosure, the comments I'm going to make right now are based on US law, and some differences will emerge between countries and maybe even municipalities, hypothetically, and the level of national emergency your country has invoked, and also typical work rules and laws. But generally speaking, in first world countries, I think you'll find in companies that purport to be professionally managed, I think you'll find that these are true. I have been listening to all sorts of conflicting rumors regarding workplace rules and laws lately. You know, questions about contractors, remote work, telecommuting, business trips, running errands. I had an email from a manager. Can I prohibit my directs from running errands while they're telecommuting? And I wrote back, no. Mark. Meetings, do they have to attend meetings? Now, look, if you've worked remotely before, you kind of know what the work rules are. It's too bad that we don't communicate these things. We're not clear with people. But by the same token, if you've never worked at home, you don't know these things. And in the same way that if you're used to working remotely for a year or so, and then suddenly the company says you have to start coming in every day, that would cause you to probably raise an eyebrow and have to rethink some of the ways you go about your day-to-day work. They're two completely different environments. Okay. Now, so some of these things may seem, what's the word for being out of sorts relative to time. I for some reason, when you hit 60 years old, you forget the word. But these things, because things are changing rapidly, you may be surprised I cover topics, but that may have changed in the last 24 hours. So let's just go through them. What about business trips? Okay. Folks, in case you're wondering, generally your company can require you to go on a business trip. Okay. Or let me say that differently. Your company would probably have a good cause for firing you if you refused today. Okay. Now, that's not to say you can't ask your boss, whom you trust, for some leeway. Right now, there are a billion examples of technology-enabled distant meetings, and maybe you don't have to have your physical presence there. Now, I'm sharing that with you so you understand how things are approached, but your organization also knows that insisting that you do so could be a dangerous move for morale. They made him go. Oh my gosh, they're ogres. On the other hand, if you're in such a situation where you're being asked maybe to make a business trip, and for the record, we don't think you will be, but there are still flights in the United States. There are still flights in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And we don't want this situation to be visited upon you. But for the record, using my body odor cast as an example, we hope you never have to deal with a director who has a body odor, but we still have guidance on it because it does happen. Okay. Even if you believe, I stress you, even if you believe that what you're being asked to do is unsafe, okay, you have to keep in mind the legal concept known as the reasonable person. So if you're being asked to do something you think is unsafe, let's say a business trip, where maybe, let's say you're in, I'm going to make this up, you're in Salt Lake City, Utah, which I don't know the incidents, but it's probably less than the incidents in Seattle. And your company asks you to make a business trip to Seattle. You could say, well, there's 10 times the cases in Seattle. That's unsafe. Okay. But the reasonable person concept asks us, how would a hypothetical reasonable person respond to this request? If airline travel isn't banned and the city you're going to was largely safe, and here's what's interesting, Seattle may be a particularly hard-hit city, but it still is relatively safe. We are not writing off the entire population of Seattle. So if your company says, I want you to go from Salt Lake to Seattle, it's not an unreasonable request. We're not saying you have to blindly go. You could ask your boss, can we not delay this? Is there not some way around this? On the other hand, if your boss says no and his or her boss says no as well, you have a tough decision to make. If it were us, I would go. But you should know that if you say no, I won't go, you're putting in place a situation where A, somebody else is going to have to go. B, maybe you have elderly parents and maybe in some way you care for them and that's a problem. And maybe your boss can make other arrangements. But at the same time, you're putting yourself in a situation where that business trip under the world that exists today, at least as far as U.S. laws are concerned, that business trip is as normal as any other business trip relative to your risk and the laws associated with it. Okay. So technically, I'll say it, you would risk being terminated. Although it's safe also to assume that it's unlikely. Very few bosses in the world would be so dramatic.
Yeah, we're not recommending that.
Yeah, but let's go further. If you ask us whether or not a judge would rule in your favor, in other words, your organization's request was unsafe and it was reasonable for you to refuse, and so you got terminated, and now you're filing a wrongful termination suit, we'd say no, the judge wouldn't rule in your favor. We think that exposure to the virus is not unsafe. I think I think the words I've heard lately is that maybe is hundreds of millions of Americans will get the virus, but maybe only 100,000 or something less or something more than that will die. And so, no offense, it sounds terrible to be talking about this, but the feeling we have of being put in a greater degree of unsafety has to be balanced with the overall degree of safety. More people have died in auto accidents this year than due to COVID-19, although certainly auto accidents are not increasing daily. And your fear is real and to be appreciated, but you can't just assume that you can put your foot down and say, I'm not on a business trip. Know some of these factors before you start thinking. And if you're put in that situation and we can help, send us an email. Okay. Working from home. Let's move to something a little bit simpler. Your company can tell you not to come into the office. Okay. Despite what your home situation might be. And this is true even if you feel fine. And you would prefer to work at work because work will be easier, even much easier, being done at the office. And they can expect you, your company can expect, and by that I mean, can your employability by the company can hinge on whether or not you accomplish your work tasks, assuming they provide you reasonable tools from home. Okay. Now, if they won't give you a laptop, they can't expect you to buy a laptop. And if you need a laptop to dial in or something like that, then there's not much you can do. And if they say don't come to the office and then they don't give you a laptop, you're protected from work tasks that require a laptop. Now, I'll just tell you how serious this is. There are people at Google who were asked to work from home. It was a little bit more serious than that, but they used polite language. And there were people who had their own laptop, but wanted more power or more screen space, and they didn't feel the need to buy their own equipment. And so they went into the office and took equipment home. And there are people that have commented that some of the Google offices looked like somebody came in and made random thefts. I don't think Google's necessarily upset about this. I don't recommend you do it at your company. Your company can expect you to attend virtually a meeting that is reasonably similar to a meeting they would expect of you that you would do in the office. Okay. They can also expect you to do so using video, not just audio, if in fact they've provided you the equipment. You can't insist on only doing audio from your home. Video use in your home is not an invasion of your privacy. Sorry, folks, there's case law on this, okay? They can't, on the other hand, tell you not to run errands during the day. That would pass into the area of control versus the implication regarding business needs. And let me say something else. I wrote this section of the podcast in a certain way. I've used examples that say they can or cannot. But guys, if you're a manager, you're they. You may be put in a situation of having to manage a direct who runs afoul of some of these rules and laws or guidelines, and you're the company to them. So be aware you're on both sides of this coin if you're working from home. Okay. Now let's go a step further. Let's talk about you insisting on working from home. Your company does not have to allow you to telecommute. The national emergency here in the States is such that companies are doing it left and right. They consider it, they encourage it. In some cases, they even enforce it and they lock the doors in the office. But the government has not required it yet of private corporations. Okay. So if you wish to insist on working from home, but your company says, no, the office is open, you saying, I'm going to stay home puts you at risk. And we want you to know that. Okay. What about safety risks in your job?
You're talking about like if you're if it requires customer contact, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, there's more examples than that, but that one certainly comes to mind. If your job requires, as an example, outside contact, customers, vendors, what have you, you certainly can express concerns and maybe even complain a little. Although, think about that for a second. You wouldn't do it to the quote company unquote. You would do it to your boss, who, of course, in law regarding this is the company to you. You could complain if there are not reasonable precautions taken to protect you. Okay. If you've been given training about how to do your job in this environment, and so therefore I have to ask you guys, bosses, are you delivering training or ensuring your people are getting the training? If you've been given training about it, refusing to do your job is risky for your employment. A good example, suppose you're a garbage man. You pick up garbage at people's houses, and you know there's an area that has an awful lot of infected people. Can you refuse to pick up their garbage if your company has given you special gloves and masks and so on? The answer is probably not. Well, you can refuse, but you do so at the risk of your employment. Now, look, do we think that a lot of these things are going to happen? No, but there's a big difference between knowing what the rules and laws are and talking about them and not knowing and sowing disinformation. It's always, well, they can't make you do that. Well, first of all, no, an organization can't make you do anything. There's just risks associated with various courses of action. Anytime anybody says they can't make you, immediately discount what they're telling you, okay? A jail can make you, but this isn't jail. We encourage you, again, to follow the reasonable person rule or lawmaking guidance. We've spoken with a bunch of people, I certainly have recently, whose personal opinions of the crisis and their therefore resultant reasonable behaviors in their mind differ widely. One person emailed me and called me an assassin for not canceling a conference when she thought it was justified. So my point about that is different people can disagree, and hopefully we can do it in an agreeable way, but just because you think something is unsafe doesn't make it so. All that said, before you consider suing somebody, use the open door policy. After your boss says, no, I think I can do it, if you still feel strongly, you can escalate to her boss. Assess your company's position based on more than one answer, and maybe your boss is a tyrant and doesn't give a hoot about you, and you've been dealing with him or her for years in this way. That might be a time, and this might be a place where their boss would be willing to overrule them. At the same time, as all this stuff goes along about safety and travel and working from home and so on, stay frosty. Maintain your professional decorum at all times. Raising your voice, insulting your boss to a third party is a recipe for disaster. You might win the battle, but the war will find you gone in 180 days, and your boss will be smart enough to fire you not because of that altercation when you raised your voice, but because you didn't do something he wanted you to do, and he has 20 other instances he's been saving up. Now, I find that person reprehensible, but they exist, and we want you to be safe, both physically and also professionally.
How about liability when it comes to virus?
Yeah, this is a good one. So if your company requires you to work, you can't claim that your company made you sick because you maintained some form of quarantine at home. So therefore you must have gotten the virus from somebody at work. There's no way to prove in virtually all cases that your work caused you to be sick. Okay? Sorry. I don't think that's a big deal for our audience, but just in case. And we can go further. What about liability for virus communication? Even though your company has a responsibility to let you know if one of your colleagues tests positive, because that's workplace safety, they're probably restricted from sharing that person's name with you. Okay? Lots of folks find this rule bizarre, but it's a function of health privacy laws, which I think are similar, not precisely exact, but similar in most of the first world countries. We have talked to several people who have said that health privacy laws played into companies' decisions to require telecommuting. Because companies knew they would have to tell employees, but they knew they couldn't tell them who, but they knew that people would play Who Shot John and figure out who did it, and then that person would be ineffective because nobody would want to be in a room with them. On the other hand, while you may not be legally required to tell your employer if you know you've been infected yourself, you still have a moral obligation to do so. Mm-hmm. Now, your company can't fire you because you got sick. Okay? Now, look, if you always work from home and always have, you don't have an obligation to tell your company, even an ethical obligation. If you don't see your colleagues, you don't have an ethical obligation to tell your colleagues or the organization. Now, I had a funny question about this. Somebody wrote me and says, my vacation got canceled. Can the company do that? Yes, your company can cancel a vacation. And not just in times of significant crises. You should know that. There are obvious exceptions to this, guys. Please don't write me and say, well, actually, my company can't. It's in the contract. Yes, if your employment is covered by a contract, some of these rules, certainly including vacation, could change. If you're involved in governmental work, vacations can be required at certain times and so on. Union rules, work rules, and so on. So don't scream bloody murder if your company cancels a vacation because it's all hands on deck, for instance. It just shows your lack of knowledge about what the rules are and what the company can do and not do. Now, look, if you're a manager, on the other hand, we'd recommend you create a significantly high bar to be met by the organization for you to cancel someone's vacation, okay? Frankly, I wonder whether all the telecommuting that's happening, there's going to be plenty of unproductive time during work hours. Different roles will be impacted differently relative to coronavirus. And some people will be crazy busy, bizarrely so, and other people will not. That's been my experience in situations like this. It depends on your work product and your processes and so on. And look, all of these rules, all of these situations, ultimately, everything that's going on now at your workplace happens more easily, more smoothly, more effectively, and more efficiently the higher the trust you have with your team. And that's it.
Go back, listen to one-on-ones.
Yeah, exactly. And the other 50 casts we have. And okay, look, so let me summarize, guys, because this is the longest cast I think we've ever done. Don't make the mistake, if you're a manager, of assuming that you're just a cog in the system and somebody else is in charge. Managers can lead. Don't wait for your company to tell you what to do. Trust yourself to put in place efforts, behaviors, processes, systems to reassure your team and maximize their productivity. Now is a good time to not worry about micromanagement. Okay? Micromanaging right now doesn't make you a micromanager. It makes you a professional manager. Distance management is a lot harder than most of us realize. Encourage your people to report on status. Check on status frequently. Out of sight, out of mind. Over-communicate. Trust yourself. You're going to be wrong some of the time. That doesn't mean you can't trust yourself. And work to build trust with your colleagues, especially your directs. Stay in touch with us here at Manager Tools about what others are doing that is working. And again, stay safe and stay frosty. We are thinking about you and the entire Manager Tools community, and we wish you well.
Yeah, well said, dude. All right, man. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one. So long.